Welcome, everybody, to the ShopNotes Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Huber. Today, I'm joined by Logan Whitmer and a special guest, furniture maker, author, and teacher, Matt Kenney, to talk about his new book and his work. I want to just say that today's episode is brought to you by Garrett Wade, offering unique tools of exceptional quality and solid value since 1975. So this is a first for us, Logan, that we get to have a special guest star beyond family or
I mean, I would consider John a special guest, right?
Right. Yeah, he's definitely special. Yeah. So today we're joined by Matt Kenney, and Matt, this is going to sound super creepy and like restraining order-ish, but I've followed your career at Fine Woodworking and on the podcast there, and as you've launched into your own work there. So it's kind of fun to be able to have you on the podcast here and talk to you in person.
Yeah, that's creepy, but it's not the creepiest thing I've ever heard. So, but I appreciate you guys having me on the podcast, and it's nice to be here.
Yeah. So by way of introduction for our audience, maybe just give an introduction to yourself and maybe your work.
Sure. Well, I'm a furniture maker. I live in a beautiful part of Connecticut, and I moved to Connecticut in 2008 to work at Fine Woodworking magazine, and I worked there for 10 and a half years. And it's been 2 years, a little over 2 years now since I left the magazine. And in that time, I have been teaching all over the U.S. and overseas. And I have written my second book, which is about kumiko, which is a Japanese art form that's really taken off in the United States over the past, maybe 4 years or so. And I've also have started work on my third book as well. And I I make and sell furniture. And most days I share what's going on in my shop through my Instagram account. And, it's a pretty happy life. Being a furniture maker is not a great way to make a living, but it's a great way to make a life. And,
sure.
Every day I wake up and I'm happy.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Because I think you probably live the dream of quite a few hobbyist woodworkers of being able to support yourself by woodworking, as clouded and rose-tinted as that dream may sometimes be.
Yeah, I guess so. It is. I am very fortunate to get to do what I love every day. And I am one of those people who probably makes everyone else cringe that says it never feels like work to me. So, the last 2 years have been truly wonderful. And, to get to make what I love to make and want to make, and also to teach, which I've always been very passionate about teaching. I used to be a college professor, and I love teaching. So to get to travel through all over the U.S. and to places like Australia and Germany to teach is absolutely amazing, especially because someone else is paying for it. And so it is a great it is a really wonderful life, and I'm very fortunate that I get to do it. And also it's actually really humbling that people would consider my work and my teaching of worth or inspirational. So it's all around a really great life, and I highly recommend it. 5 stars,
So compare college teaching to woodworking teaching, are there similarities that you found or stark differences?
Well, one, in a woodworking class, more often than not, everyone wants to be there. You know, I mean, everyone, they sign up for a woodworking class because they want to be there. When I was a college professor, I taught philosophy, and I taught a lot of things like requirements, like intro to deductive logic. And there's 60 students there, and maybe one of them really wants to be there. So there's that difference. I think the biggest difference between then and now for me is, back then, if I wrote something, really, I wrote a dissertation and maybe 5 people or 6 people have read it. And
Sure.
now when I share something, a lot more people see it and they appreciate it. And, they tell me that it makes a difference for them. And I think that's the biggest difference, that although I found teaching philosophy to be rewarding, and it certainly affected students' lives positively,
Sure.
What I do now has it reaches far more people and has a positive effect on far more people. And that is, immensely rewarding. And it keeps me working hard to ensure that what I am doing is beneficial, not only to me, but also to other folks in the craft, and also to the craft as a whole. That, I want to make sure that when I get too old to do this, that if I'm contributing something that makes the craft stronger and to flourish and make it approachable or available to far more people than it was when I started.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how did you move from, what was the journey of a woodworker to go from what you were doing and then you start into kumiko, where you've decided to take a deep dive in that? Because I know a lot of people will add a kumiko panel to this, that, or the other thing, but it's in the midst of other woodworking.
Right. Well, so back around 2015, or it might have been, in 2015, I started this thing where I decided to make 52 boxes during the course of a year. And got started in April of 2015. And I guess it was sometime during that period that my coworker and friend at Fine Woodworking, Mike Pekovich, he started to dabble in kumiko. And that was because there's a furniture maker in Massachusetts named John Reed Fox, his work is mind-blowing. It's so amazing. And John uses kumiko in some of his work. And so there was one of his pieces was on the back cover, and there was a short article about John makes a pattern called Asanoha. And so Mike started to mess around with it, and we were just riding back from lunch one day, and we were talking about it. And I said, "Oh, it'd be really cool to incorporate that into some of the boxes that I'm making." And I started to think about how to do it. And so initially I was just using the framework in putting it in boxes. I put it in 2 different tea cabinets during that time. But then I started to do it more. And I don't know precisely what caused kumiko to take off so much, but I do know that it corresponded with Mike and I doing it and showing it on our Instagram feeds.
Right.
So people wanted to start taking it. And so I kind of got more into the patterns, because the patterns, it's one of the things that I'm fascinated with in the world generally, but also in the things that I make. I'm interested in using like the parts of a box or the parts of a piece of furniture to create patterns. And it's something that I think the Shakers did really well. And it's one of the ways that Shaker work has influenced my own work. so I just got deeper and deeper into the patterns and making them. And so it's like I think kumiko lines up really well with what I find interesting in the world and in furniture making. And I saw it as a way to embellish my work, but also just as something that was in and of itself attractive and beautiful. So I started to make them as like decorative wall panels.
Sure.
And realized that people really like them. So, and that people would buy them. So, from there, you have another incentive to do it. So, and then, another former fine woodworking editor who owns a publishing company now asked me if I would do a book about it. And I resisted for quite a while because I didn't think that I was good enough. And we eventually settled on a format that I thought was within the realm of my capabilities. And so that's how the book came about. But, really, it's just an interest in pattern. And, it's also a nice way to spend an early morning in the shop,
Sure.
quietly on the bench. And that's, often when I go in the mornings when I get up, I like to start my morning quietly and sort of build up to machinery. So kumiko is a way to do that, or just using, making sure that when I finish the day before, there's something that I can do at a shooting board or something like that the next morning. So the transition was partly out of my own fascination, but also because I realized there was a demand for it, that people really, really were interested in it. And so, when you're self-employed, you have to be able to see opportunities and take them.
Right.
It was both things, really.
Well, and Logan, once your wife got hold of the book, Matt's book, now you're on the hook for a kumiko pattern, right?
Yeah, it's funny because my wife asks for stuff. She asks for me to build stuff. And I kind of put all that off because it's like, yeah, I could build another dining room table, or you know what I mean? It's like, it's another table, it's another whatever. But when she's like, hey, I want you to make a couple of these for the house, I'm like, okay. It's like, this is something I'm excited to try my hand at, right? And it's something that she was interested in. So it's like, hey, I can actually get some shop time doing something I'm interested in, and try something new to me. So yeah, it was interesting. Matt, I think it's funny that you talk about the patterns and flipping through your book here. It's amazing how much the pattern that you make with the kumiko pieces and the pattern you're working on changes the attitude of what the overall aesthetics of the piece looks like. You know what I mean? Like the different patterns that you produce in these books, it's amazing the variety of different feels you can get from them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think that's because one, you're creating different shapes, but also there's the interplay of positive and negative space.
Yeah.
And how much, say, of a background fabric that shows, or if it's in a window, how much light is let through. And I mean, it's like if you use the fundamental pattern, which gets used the most, is the asanoha or hemp leaf. And if you make that with thicker stock and it's really crowded and tight, that's going to give you a different visual sense, or than if you use pieces that are really thin and it's more open up. So you can, depending on how you, in a sense, you crowded, you make an individual pattern, or how many instances of the pattern you fit into a panel, you can make something that's more open and relaxed, and it maybe has more harmony, or something that has maybe a little more tension in it. And I think you're right that you can sort of feel all of that when you look at the panel as a whole.
Yeah.
So as you're writing a book like this, and this probably plays back into as a magazine editor, on the one hand, we have attention in writing where we want to instill confidence in our readers that it's possible to do this, and it's also possible to do it in such a way that you don't want to immediately burn it. But
Yeah.
but there are also not obstacles, but things that can get in the way of a woodworker in learning a new skill that they need to be mindful of too. You know, it's really easy to say this is the no fail finish, or 3 secrets to never have to sand again, and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, whether it's carving or making kumiko, there are some challenges to it. So what would you say, as you've taught this now, that you see woodworkers either skip a step or really need to be mindful of as they're working through?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, let me say, as a former editor, and not to offend anybody, but I absolutely hate any headline that says secrets to this, or, 7 tips, I even when I was woodworking, I hated those headlines. But anyways, so kumiko in and of itself, like the technical side of it, like here's how you make a frame, here's all that stuff, is technically not challenging, and I think in the book, the techniques that I show on how to make a frame, and also the techniques I explain on how to fit parts, it's all, I don't think that's too challenging. I think that what the challenge is for kumiko, one, and I think this is probably true of all woodworking, it's something that no matter what I teach, it's always something that has to be addressed. Sharpness, right? So in order to really make really good fitting kumiko pieces, you need to have a chisel that is genuinely sharp, and that is something that I found many woodworkers don't really understand what genuinely sharp is. So I think that's one of the challenges. But I think more importantly, after that, is that in order to do kumiko really well, you have to have patience, because at times you're going to be making very, very small adjustments to a stop on a jig so that you can take just a hair or less than a hair off of that little pattern piece and fit it in. And you also have to have the patience to know that even though this fits in the frame, it's bowing the frame out of square. So I have to take it out and keep working on the fit until it's just right. And I think that level of patience is challenging for almost everybody, because it is really fine work. And you also have to this is true with all woodworking. You have to be really clear of mind and focused on what you're doing. So, you can't be thinking about, work or problems at home or anything like that. You've got to be really focused so that you don't make mistakes and so you don't hurt yourself. So I think that with kumiko, that's the big challenge, is sharpness, patience, and focus. And wanting to rush through things always leads to problems, and those things I think are generally true of woodworking, but especially true with kumiko. So it requires a certain level of precision and exactness, and that requires dexterity. And those are things that you can acquire if you don't naturally have, but that requires patience. And so it's but I think that's the biggest challenge of kumiko until you get into some more complicated and technically challenging patterns, none of which are really in the book. The book is all sort of like an introduction to kumiko with patterns that are, fairly approachable. Yeah.
Sure. I guess that's what I liked about it too, is that you you had alluded to this earlier. You worked out what you wanted in the book, and even admitted straight up in the beginning that this isn't the history of kumiko patterns based on soji screens dug out of wells in ancient Japan or something like that. It's more of your interaction with the craft of kumiko and how you've begun to apply it. So I thought that was a unique aspect of the book.
Oh, yeah, thanks. That was actually they wanted me to do like a history of kumiko, and I was like, I don't know the history of kumiko really. And I don't really want to do the research, and I mean that makes it like a cop out. But I also, for me, woodworking generally is what's so interesting about it is the story of yourself that you get to develop as a person. And the more you get into woodworking and furniture making, and the more it becomes part of your life, the more it becomes a part of your story. And that's just not you personally in the shop, but also the things that you make and take into your home and how your family interacts with them. And so I think with kumiko, I wanted to tell her really not the history, which could be boring, but maybe to make it more approachable to other people, is to say, well, hey, look, this is sort of my history of it. And here's how I got started with it. And you can see that when I started, it was just framework. I wasn't doing patterns. And so it's something that you can, it's a journey. It's always an evolution. So don't worry about where you're starting. Just look to where you're going and how to get there. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's an obstacle that a lot of woodworkers, the classes that I've taught too, is they see your work or the work that they aspire to, and then they look at their own results, probably way too magnified than they need to, and feel like it's impossible or unapproachable, and realize that the early projects are just as valuable and beautiful as their later work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything you make is a stepping stone or a milepost in your development, and everything you make is an opportunity to learn. And honestly, you learn the most when you make mistakes. If you stop and think about why you made the mistake and what you can take away, how you can make sure you don't do that mistake again, you can learn a lot from your mistakes, and it's a necessary part of developing in any craft is to make things, have them not turn out the way you want to, and then make something else, whether it's that same thing again or it's something different. You have to keep making something, completing it, and then moving on to the next thing. And I'm asked a lot of, well, not a lot, but I get asked enough about, especially by young people, I'm just starting out, how do I get to where you are? And I say, be patient. And when you're 48, you'll be where I am. It's like, it takes time, that there is no shortcut. It reminds me of when in high school and college, I was a distance runner, and after college too. And there's this really famous distance running book. It's a story about a guy that's training to run the mile in the Olympics. And they always talk about the trial of miles and the miles of trials. And it's the only way that you can become a good distance runner is to run. The only way that you can become a good furniture maker is to make furniture and make it and make it and make it and make it. So yeah, it's because a lot of people do look at the work of accomplished furniture makers and think they can never get there. But the truth is you absolutely can. You just need to make furniture.
Right.
So
that doesn't make a fun cover blurb though.
No, it doesn't.
Just keep making it until you make it.
Right. But that was like when I did the thing with the boxes, that was the whole idea, was that I'd gotten to a point with designing that I felt I was kind of stagnant. And I would look at the work of, like, say, Garrett Hack, and realized how mature and defined it was. And I would think, well, how did he get there? And I said, well, Garrett's made and designed a lot of furniture. So I thought, what can I do that would allow me to design and make, and do a lot of repetitions really fast. Now, I happen to already love making boxes. So
Sure.
I was like, I could probably make a box a week. Let me try that. And, the idea was to get a lot of practice doing it, and you're right. It's not a great selling point, but, but I think if you hear an accomplished furniture maker say that to you as a novice, as a beginner, I find that comforting.
Sure.
Because you're not being told, yeah, you'll never be like me because I have special powers. I mean, the only special powers I have is stupid diligence, or I'm stupid enough to keep going out in the shop, and I'm patient enough to keep going out in the shop. It's not woodworking skills. It's like, it's just being patient and being determined and loving something enough to go out and do it every day, and that's all you need.
Right.
Yeah.
And being able to accept where you are, like with your box project, I thought especially, you were making boxes and you used them as a stepping stone, but you accepted where they are and was able to move to the next iteration, or even if it ended up being a totally different box, the next one, of seeing it as a stepping stone. And even though you moved past it, it was still a valuable, it held a valuable place.
Oh, for sure. You have to, and I think that's a hard thing, that when you are just starting out and you haven't made much stuff, it's hard to see how you can just let something go. And because a lot of people, I've been asked quite a bit, someone who makes and sell things, how do you just let go of something and give it to somebody else, even if it's in exchange for money? And I think you have to look at what you're doing right now and the grander scheme of what you want to become. And, these are larger things that apply to life as well, that you have to see that, what I'm making right here, this box, is not the final destination. This is just part of the journey. And I need to, I strongly believe you have to complete everything you start. You can't leave things by the wayside. You have to complete them, and then you have to let go and you have to move on, and you have to take something from it. Like, here's what I learned doing that, whether it's a technique or it's how to improve making a table saw sled, or it's even just a little design detail that you can then take on to the next project. But you have to see and understand that you, as a furniture maker or a woodworker or as a person, you're always evolving.
Sure.
And so you can't hold on to the stage where you are now, because you'll never get to the next stage, which more often than not is something more beautiful and more profound than what you've already done. So yeah, letting go, it's a hard thing to learn how to do, but you have to learn how to do it. And I think the only way you learn how to do it is by finding yourself in situations in life and in the shop where you have no option but to let go. And a lot of times someone will say, well, what should I do with this? Because I kind of messed it up. And if I look at it and I don't see an easy solution, I say, you know what you do? You put it in the stove, and you let go and you start over. And that's okay. It's not a big deal. Everyone makes mistakes. I screw things up all the time, but I also get back up and keep going. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to take a little break here and do a message from our sponsor. Then we'll get back to Matt. For 45 years, Garrett Wade has been driven by the belief that the tools you use in your shop or garden should be as enjoyable as the finished work itself. Their team travels the world to ensure each tool selected has exceptional quality and solid value for their customers. Whether it's from a regional maker of Japanese pull saws or leather crafters right here in the U.S., Their tools are timeless and will last for years. For their 45th anniversary, they're celebrating the makers who have been part of the journey. Garrett Wade is giving away a $500 gift card to one lucky winner that can be used for any of the high-quality tools they carry for the shop, home, garage, and garden. 2 additional winners will receive up to $250 in additional Garrett Wade prizes. You can enter to win the grand prize at garrettwade.com/sweepstakes. No purchase required, and good luck. Now, one of the questions that I had for you, Matt, was as a furniture maker, a lot of the work, and maybe I'm just applying it from myself and translating it to you, but as a furniture maker, you end up building kind of one-off pieces because you need something for the house, or you're giving it as a special gift. And now in your new role, you end up moving, still doing one-off stuff, but maybe more from a production mindset, because I know that you've done some kumiko blocks or the patterns, where you'll do a batch order and things like that. What are the kind of things that you need to change in your head when you go from I'm just making one of these to I need to get 12 of these done?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think one of the big things that will change is you put the hand tools down, because which I love hand tools, but you have to be because you have to be efficient, right? You have to be profitable. And so if you're going to do something efficiently and also with the least wear and tear on your body, which I know if you're 25, you're not thinking about that. But like when I make the kumiko, when I'm ripping out 4,000 strips of kumiko, that type of repetitive motion is really damaging to a body. And so I think about how can I do this efficiently, quickly, and with as little wear and tear on my body as I can. And the kumiko stuff is, that's a little different because I am making really large batches, like maybe 300 kumiko guide blocks at a time.
Right.
And that type of production is significantly different than if I'm making 5 to 15 boxes that are all the same. It's slightly different, but what you have to do, it forces you to analyze the techniques and processes that you're using and to refine them to save time and to save effort and to save materials. And you also have to keep refining them. So I've been through like 4 or 5 different developments in how I rip strips out to make kumiko parts. And I finally gotten to something that is really not difficult on my body, and also produces much better results than the other ways I've done it. It's a matter of thinking about efficiency, speed, materials, and wear and tear on your body. And then also, of course, accuracy, because if you're producing something in mass to sell to people, it has to be high quality. Because if it goes out the door not high quality, you've just wasted, or you've just cost yourself way more time and way more money to fix the problem than if you had solved it in the first place. And issues still arise,
right.
and I still have to go back, and someone will say, hey, I got a couple of frame strips that were tapered and they're too thin, so when I'm making stuff now, I think ahead and go, okay, well, I know I only need 20 orders of this frame, but let me make 30. And that way I'll have extras on hand in case problems arise, things like that. So, but if you're making, like, I've done also things sort of like group buys for my Instagram followers, where it's like, if 20 of you buy this box, then I'm able to sell it at this price instead of the higher price if it was just for one.
Oh,
and when I do that, again, it's like, okay, if I were making this as one-off, this is how I would do it. But if I'm going to make it as 20, then it makes sense to make a pattern that I can pop the front of the box in and route that little finger relief and do it in 5 minutes as opposed to a half hour. And you think of other ways, you know, one of the things like, so when I make boxes like that, I tend to make them painted boxes. And that's because now all of a sudden I can let myself not do a 4-corner match around the box. And that speeds up work dramatically. But in order to do a painted box, you have to design something that'll be attractive if it's painted. So the whole process of developing something that can be mass produced starts with designing it. And so when you're designing it, you think about what type of joinery can I do that's quick but accurate and strong? Okay, how should I secure the lid in, or how should I put the bottom in? You know, do I do a rabbet and glue it into the rabbet, or do I do a groove and have a floating bottom that's solid wood? You know, so you rethink the design to make so that it enables you to have processes that are fast and efficient and accurate, and also produce a product, so to speak, that is attractive. I love it, that challenge, especially the part of making it beautiful. I love that part. I love, because nothing I ever make is complicated. I love simplicity in design, but also simplicity in construction. So I love that part of the challenge.
Yeah. I'm thinking of kind of a different branch of the woodworking tree, but Jared Stonedahl and his stuff on craft and craft production that he's done some writing on that I think is kind of interesting too. Plays a lot with what you were saying, where, you know, if you were to put out all of the boxes that you've done, there's definitely a family resemblance, and maybe from the back they look identical, but the first one and the 200th one are vastly different when side by side. You know, that there's this process of evolution in the process and in probably the aesthetics and the look, just as you've grown as a woodworker and a furniture maker between those two boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. There is, if you look at the 52 boxes I made, there's definitely things that tie them all together. But if you look at the first one versus the 51st and 52nd one, you can see there's a lot of growth there. And I've actually been thinking a lot about this particular topic over the last several years. And I don't know how, I will say there is a book in my head that is about how you design furniture for a house so that, you know, honestly, so I don't want a house that's full of arts and crafts furniture. I know some people do, and that's fine. It's beautiful stuff. I don't want even a single piece of it in my house, to be honest, but it's my personal taste. But it's like, I want to have a house full of furniture that I've made that is unified, but also diverse. And so how do you do that? You know, how do you develop yourself as a designer? How do you develop the things that you're interested in when it comes to design, to have a diverse set of furniture in your house that is yet still unified? I think it was the Green brothers, but it might have been Frank Lloyd Wright. It might have been all of them, who's, you know, they would design furniture for their homes, and they were totally against the idea that the owner would sell the house and take the furniture with them. They're like, right. No. This furniture only makes sense in this house. And I'm interested in that idea. And it's part of, I've lived in my current home for 2 years. And when I moved in, I really didn't have any furniture, much to my kids' chagrin. And and it's like, well, I didn't want to have furniture because I'm going to make it. I'm forcing myself to make furniture for my house. And I'm learning about that process of making things that feel at home in your house.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I probably went off on a tangent there, but
No, it's totally legit, because I think that's something that's difficult for some woodworkers to wrap their heads around, is being able to make something that's unique to them while still allowing like a range of expression in that making. That it doesn't. You can be influenced by shaker stuff, but it doesn't mean that all of your stuff has to look like Christian Bexford made it.
Right.
That
Right. Unless you ask Chris that, and then he'll say, yes, it does.
right.
No, Chris is that. But no, I think you're right. Like finding, because that's another question that I'm asked, is like, well, how did you find your aesthetic voice? And although it makes me a little uncomfortable to say things like this, I do think that if I make a box or a wall cabinet or something, I do think that people can identify it as something that I designed and made. And I think, so I've thought about this a lot, about how is it that I came to that. And I think that looking back, I can see that what I'm fascinated with, what I focus on when designing furniture, are like the same things that I'm fascinated by in the world. So like the interplay of light with form to create shadow and dimensionality and patterns and colors. And
Sure.
It's so what I tell people now is like, all of us are unique individuals, right? No, there's no carbon copies out there. And the way that I see the world and the way that I think about the world and sort of the way I interpret it visually and aesthetically and emotionally is different from how you do it. And so if you want to develop yourself as your own aesthetic voice, you need to stop and think about, like, if you find yourself staring at something in the world because you like it, stop and think, what is it about this thing that fascinates me? And if you do that enough, I think you'll find that there are things that you're always drawn to. And then you can take those things and start to figure out ways to put them into your work, you know? And once you know you're in tune with what is unique about the way you see the world, you'll be able to begin to put that back out, to express it in whatever media you choose, furniture making being one. So, yeah, that's something that I do think is a challenge. And it's, again, something you only get to by practicing, by doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah. So let's do a look back using kind of a running analogy then. Can you remember maybe a couple of mileposts in your growth as a designer that these were significant changes in how you either approached woodworking or how your design aesthetic has changed? And then peering up ahead of the road, do you see something coming along?
Okay. Well, probably some of the earliest things that happened for me that really had an impact on me as a designer. I'm being serious. When I was a kid, my dad was a contractor. And so we grew up around tools and stuff. And my brother and I made a tree fort, and we made it, like, oh, the door needs to be here and it should have this kind of ladder. And then when we were teenagers, we would make skate ramps. And learning to make skate ramps, you start to learn to problem solve, and you start to learn about the relationship between the way things look and the way things perform, right? And how important, with some things it's really important how well they perform as opposed to what they look like. So, but as I really started to develop as a designer after I started at Fine Woodworking, and I was always fascinated with bento boxes, which are, it's a way that food is served in Japan and in Japanese restaurants, and because I like all the little compartments, and I decided to make a box like that, and I made a box with 2 compartments and 2 lids, and I liked it, but I thought it was a little too squat, so I redesigned it and made it wider and shorter and longer. And it was like, boom, that's what I was going for. And it also started to define my aesthetic in the sense that the lid was set, the two lids were set down into a rabbit, and they were a little bit proud of the sides. So, and I wanted to do that to create shadow lines. And I also had the bottom come out beneath the sides so that the box would sit up off the surface, and that would create a shadow line around the bottom. And I put fabric in that box, and that was like my first foray into using fabric. So that was like a big turning point. And then I really wanted to make a shaker oval box, but I didn't want to make a shaker oval box because I'm by nature a contrarian. And everybody makes oval boxes. I'd seen round boxes, but I thought the techniques that the shakers used are awesome, but they're also kind of involve steam bending and all this stuff. I was like, what if I turned a box? And I live very close to Hancock Shaker Village, and they have a round barn there. And I was like, I'm going to make a box that kind of looks like the round barn, and I'm going to use milk paint on it. So I used milk paint on the body, and then all of a sudden I was using milk paint with solid wood. And that was like a really pivotal thing for me. I regularly acknowledge that one of the things that makes my work identifiable is that I use milk paint in ways that you should do things that other people haven't traditionally done. Right. So I'm not afraid just to paint a box body. And I do get eyebrows raised by that. Yeah. So, but, when I was learning to make furniture, like back in the early 2000s, the idea that you would paint wood was, it was heretical. And part of me takes joy in painting things for that exact reason, sort of like, giving the finger to the old guys. But, so that was really pivotal when I first started to use milk paint and not be afraid to use milk paint. The introduction of kumiko into my work was really important. And there are smaller things, like the first time, like I made like a jewelry box with 3 levels. And instead of having it all be in one case, I broke the 3 levels into individual boxes and put painted spacers between the boxes. And this idea of like taking the structure of a piece of casework and blowing it up and making it individual pieces and bringing it back together. Something that I'm still fascinated by. Going forward, right now I'm working on a credenza for my office, which is I think a step forward. But the thing after that is a stereo console for my living room, which is going to introduce. I'm going to start using inlay for that. But of course, it's not going to be traditional inlay. So I also, in my fun time, I do illustrations. So I'm usually of these robots, but I've sort of developed I also do illustrations of robot flowers. So I know it sounds crazy, but I think it's going to look awesome. So I'm going to start doing things like that. But continuing to develop taking everything I learned making the boxes and developing that, evolving that into things that I can use when I make full scale furniture.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think that's next.
Okay. Logan, you got anything?
No, I'm just sitting here soaking this all in. This is awesome.
Yeah. Did you wear your hip waders?
I did not. They're in the garage. You can grab them if you want. Duck season's just starting, so.
Yeah.
One final question that I want to ask you is this is something that we've been talking about here at Woodsmith about is projects that we feature. And Logan and I are both dads, and I know that you have kids. So we were thinking of, as a furniture making father, have you thought about what projects you would want to build for your kids to send them on in the world when they're ready to leave the nest? Like, is there, a series of, whether it's essentials or a fun project or something?
Right. Wow. One, I've made my kids things throughout their lives. So like my son, I made my daughter's crib. Actually made it on like a tiny little balcony in an apartment in Columbia, South Carolina. But I made my son's first bed and still have that bed. I now he's in a loft bed that I made for him in his bedroom. But they each have, like, my daughter's jewelry cabinet is something that I made. And I hope she takes that with her. And my son has a little wall cabinet. He actually has two little wall cabinets that I made. And actually two Christmases ago, I made them each a kumiko panel, and, framed and painted and everything. And neither one of them was all that excited about it. But I was like, listen, I know that you think this is lame, but just try to hold on to it, and you're going to appreciate it one day. And I think, though, if they were to move out and to move in somewhere like an apartment or whatever, I think what I would want to make for them is something tremendously utilitarian. Because, say, like a dining table.
Right.
Because every day you sit at the dining table and you have at least one meal. Right. And so that dining table becomes a part of your daily life and starts, and even in a subconscious way, starts to give meaning to your life. And that way, maybe selfishly for me, every day they're sitting down at something that I made for them, and it's something that's becoming more and more part of their life on a daily basis. So as opposed to making them something really, like a highboy or something like that, like, nobody wants a highboy anymore. So I would, or, even like a blanket chest. I'm not even sure how many young people want blanket chests anymore. Probably not many. So I would think I would make something utilitarian that could also grow with them. So I'm going to make you a dining table, but it's going to be a nice dining table that you're not going to want to throw out, I hope. And, also something that was functional. So it can go from being a 4-person to a 6-person in case you need that. And so I think things like that, I would be interested in making for them. And also, like, even little small things like, my daughter loves to eat udon noodles. So I'll make her, a set of chopsticks that she can take with her. And if those get worn out, I'll make her some more. And I think that one of the things I'm really fascinated by is that sure, the utility of the things that we make is important, but pieces of furniture and things in general have a purpose beyond their utility. And I'm interested in, like, how I can make things and with an eye towards their purpose and not just their utility. And so I think a lot about how a piece will interact with someone's daily life, because that's where a piece of furniture gets its meaning from. That's where it gets sentimental value from. And so that's the kind of, if I could make things for them with that in mind, that's what I would want to do.
Sure. All right. So let's wrap up with our final segment where we're just give an update on the current projects that we're working on. Logan, I'll start with you.
Well, so this week what are we? We're on Tuesday right now. So last week we wrapped up our final show for our final episode for season 14 of the Woodsmith shop. So I grabbed this guy from the studio this morning. This is this huge walnut platter, right, that I turned for our turning episode. And do you guys ever do something that you just know is not going to work? and you do it anyways. So this
turn a giant platter from a piece of burl.
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of exactly like that. A green piece of burl, I might add.
Yeah.
So this was, I turned this guy last week. And turning something I've been doing a lot of lately. I love it. It's kind of my new hobby. So when we did this turning episode, I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? So Phil's doing a project, a small kit type project. Chris was doing some tool handles. I'm like, I want to show another side of turning, which is, platters, bowls, vessels, right? So I decided I was going to do this platter, and instead of doing, a little like plate size platter, I'm going to do something big, right? I'm going to show turning something large because it's kind of a different beast than turning a little, kit at 3,000 RPM. So what do I have here? Okay, so I have a piece of walnut crotch the tree was taken down in April. I put it on my sawmill in May. It's pretty wet still, but you know what? That's kind of another fun aspect of turning. So I stand there all morning turning this platter, knowing full well, and I even say it on camera, it's on record. This is probably going to crack. It's going to start moving on me. It's green. It is what it is. You have two options. You either let it do what it's going to do, and it becomes kind of a piece of art. The wood's going to do what it wants to do, right? Or you rough turn it, and then you finish turn it. I decided, let's turn it, finish size. Let's make it. Let's let the wood be wood. It's going to move. It's going to do what it wants to, especially with this being a fairly green piece of walnut. And I grabbed it this morning. Lo and behold, it's starting to move. And it was starting to move on me when it was on the lathe. You get that hit and miss as it's starting to fold into the Pringle chip, right? But, as I grabbed it this morning, I can feel some of these cracks are opening up a little bit. Some of these knots are starting to curl up a little. So we'll see what it's going to do. You know what? It's going to be one of those things. I'm going to let it do whatever it will. And that's the end of it. So
I think the way you handle that is that you tell everybody that you're turning a walnut taco shell.
Exactly.
Eventually, that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, and you always see a lot of these turners that they'll turn something paper thin, and they'll naturally let it curl, and it becomes kind of a natural fluid form, which I think is kind of cool. And who's to say that a platter has to be round? Traditionally, bowls and platters were always turned green, and they're going to do whatever they do. So, it is what it is. But that aside, everybody knows I've been working on this camper. We finally got it out this weekend. But I did come down last week into my shop here and realized my wife used all my beautiful redwood cutoffs that I was going to make into little shingles. She used them as paint spacers as she was painting these camper doors. So now, all my beautiful redwood pieces have paint all over them. My staves are all covered in white and green paint. So maybe I'll take a note out of Matt's book and start painting my old growth redwood. Yeah.
I don't know if I would do that, but
because I have two of these coopered blanks here to turn birdhouse or do some round birdhouses. I had enough staves to do another one, and I was going to do that, but now I got all my little beveled edges are all covered in white paint. So it's like they were sitting there. I thought I was supposed to use them as spacers. It's like I got a shelf behind you full of them, full of standoffs.
I was teaching a class once, and we started class by I was talking about which boxes we're going to make, and I was like, "We're going to make this box. You all brought cherry to make it out of, and we're going to paint it." And this person says, "I'm not painting my beautiful cherry." And I said, "Who said your cherry's beautiful?" And said, "I was like, it's not, paint it." Sorry.
No, that's all right. So I'm working on a old radio cabinet that belonged to my grandparents and transforming it. Well, it had been transformed into a bookcase long ago and covered in contact paper because wood grain contact paper is better than regular wood, I guess. But so I'm working on that and veneering the doors and finishing it up. And I'm hoping to get that wrapped up in the next couple of weeks just because This one has been sitting around pretty much the whole of the COVID season, and it just needs to have some closure right now. So
you veneered those doors months ago.
yeah, I did. But part of it was I needed to, before I could do the final size on the doors, I needed to wrap up all the modifications that I was going to do on the case so that I knew how I'm going to cut these down to their final size so that it still all fits. So
You listen to Matt, you start a project, you finish it.
Right. Well, I'm trying.
That's really important. Yeah.
So Matt, how about you?
What am I working on right now? Well, let's see. I'm just doing the last bit of finish on a small tea cabinet that I made as part of my podcast. Then last week I had a student in my shop, and he made a wall cabinet, and I made a wall cabinet that needs pulls and drawer bottoms made. So I got to get that done. I have another wall cabinet that I'm making for someone that the whole thing is made out of hemlock construction grade lumber that I bought at a box store. And like cutting it up and stuff to get better grain out of it. So it was an exercise in taking something that looks ugly and trying to make something that looks pretty. It looks pretty, and I'm almost done with that. My credenza is almost done. I'm starting to sound like I'm not taking my own advice, but like the credenza is not a paying job. So whenever I get a paying job, I've got to set it aside.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are the big things I'm working on right now. And I've got orders for guide blocks and panel kits to make this week. And I hope next week I can take the entire 5 days and finish up my shop. I need to do some trim work that will seal up some places where air can get in and out of, which I really want to do before the cold sets in to New England in a couple of months. So,
right.
Yeah. All that at once.
Okay. All at once. Bunch of plates spinning on sticks.
Yes.
So want to thank Matt for joining us today. Again, his book is The Art of Kumiko. And thanks for joining us. Matt, where can people find you on the internets?
Well, thanks for having me. My website is mekwoodworks.com. And the best place if you want to keep up with what I'm doing in the shop is my Instagram, which is also mekwoodworks. And, I'm on Twitter with the same handle, and there's a Facebook page, but, it's Instagram is really where I'm active the most. I said Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah, Instagram.
Yes.
So, Instagram. And then if you're curious about if you need Kumiko guide blocks or you want to buy a panel kit because you're not quite ready to make all the parts for that, you can find that stuff in the store on my website and, copies of my books and things like that. So, yeah.
Okay.
And I have a YouTube channel too.
All right. And you have a podcast as well, right?
I do have a podcast. It's called the Matt and Joe Woodworking Fun Hour, where I'm teaching. It's the guy that taught me to make furniture. His name is Joe, and he never asked for anything in return. And so then I met this guy, Joe, and he asked me if I would teach him woodworking. And I was like, well, I think this is finally my turn to repay my Joe. So the podcast is mostly about me helping Joe learn how to work wood and to make furniture.
Sweet.
Yeah. Just fun.
All right. We'll put a link to Matt's book and his website and Instagram page on our show notes page, woodsmith.com/podcasts. Otherwise, thanks again, Matt. If you enjoy the podcast, please give us a review and a rating so we can get in front of other woodworkers and share the love. Otherwise, we'll see you again next week. One reminder that today's episode was brought to you by Garrett Wade, offering unique tools of exceptional quality and solid value since 1975. Thanks, everybody. Bye.